Good morning. I hope you're enjoying your Sunday so far. In a previous video, I talked a bit about how to behave in a power Porsche. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to be an intellectual. So what is an intellectual? An intellectual is somebody who thinks deeply and seeks to contribute to the thought life of society, to the thought life of humanity. Um, so how would one become an intellectual? Well, what you will want to do is to get an advanced education, to be educated to degree level and beyond that, at postgraduate level. Now, there are people who are very clever, who have perhaps read lots of books, they're knowledgeable people, but who don't have a formal education, and that's perfectly fine. But I do think that if you're seeking to be an intellectual, you need to have some kind of formal education. You see, the people who are very clever but who haven't been to university, they often they often have a lot of good ideas and a lot of very insightful thoughts, but they're not very good at putting them into any kind of system or to think systematically, and they're often not very critical about their own thinking. So they'll come up with lots of ideas but don't necessarily think about some of the possible counter arguments to their ideas, and they're not able to see the weaknesses of some of their ideas and the theories. So, what a university education does is it gets you to think critically, to think things through at a deeper level, to deal with arguments and counter arguments. Now, higher education does have a bit of a bad press these days. There is a strong argument made by a lot of people on the right that universities have something of a left wing, of a liberal or a woke bias. And there may be some substance to that. I mean, I tend to be somebody who's a small c conservative. I tend to lean to the right sometimes. So I can kind of see where they're coming from. At the same time, one needs to ask whether the Conservatives' critics of university education perhaps don't really like what people in universities are saying, not so much because those ideas are wrong, but because they simply don't confirm the biases and assumptions and beliefs of conservatives. Uh, if you're an intellectual, you won't just blindly follow your conservative beliefs, but you will want to subject them to a degree of criticism. So, what level of education should an intellectual aspire to? I think you need to be looking at getting a PhD, a Doctor of Philosophy degree. Having a PhD is very much the benchmark. It's the sign that you have made a constructive contribution to academic life, that you've got ideas of your own. Now, a lot of people do admit that they regret having done a PhD, that they found that it's not necessarily been a very helpful qualification in advancing their careers. Um, I must admit that reflects my own experience. I did a PhD. I spent about 6 years working on it. It's got absolutely no relevance to my own career in healthcare. And the only job my PhD ever got me was marking GCSE exam papers. Well, I earned some extra money at the time. But I don't regret doing my PhD, even though it hasn't necessarily been very useful to me. It was something I wanted to do for many years. It was very much an ambition of mine to get a doctorate. So I'm very glad that I did it. Um, and I'm proud of myself for doing it. If you want to be an intellectual, I think you do need to have that aspiration to get a PhD. But education does not stop with getting your final qualification. You see, after you've got your education, you need to carry on learning, to carry on reading. So you need to be reading lots of books. You should read widely in different subjects. You should read books by people that you don't necessarily agree with. I think you should try to read at least, pardon me, at least some academic level books, not just popular books or bestsellers. There should certainly be a specialist subject that you have, of which you have a great knowledge and which you've read many books in that particular area, although, as I say, you should read widely. And you shouldn't just read new books, you should read old books too. At some point, I'll probably make a video about why one should read the ancient classics of Greece and Rome. I think that an intellectual should have read the Homeric epics. They should read at least some of the works of Plato and Aristotle. They should have some awareness of Greek tragedy. These works, these ancient works, are the foundations of Western culture. So if you are an intellectual, you should know something about them and have some familiarity with them. It may be helpful to read academic journals if you can. They will certainly contribute to an awareness of academic debates that are going on. And you should read newspapers. I made a video a while ago about why it's really helpful to read newspapers. They will massively increase your general knowledge and an awareness of what's going on in the world. And you'll also want to have an awareness of arts and culture. Have you heard the saying that an intellectual is a man who hears the William Tell Overture and doesn't shout, "Hi-ho, Silver"? A lot of young people won't get that joke because they've never watched the Lone Ranger TV series, but I rather like that. I think that an intellectual should listen to some classical music at least some of the time. Yes, there's a lot of wonderful popular music that you can enjoy, and you all know that I really like metal. However, I think that you should listen to some classical music if you want to be an intellectual. Classical music has had a huge influence on our culture. It's important to know about that contribution. Also, listening to classical music, you're not carried away by the frenzy of the beat, you're not tempted to sing along to the lyrics, and so you have to get into the habit of listening to it, to appreciate it. You have to listen to what's going on in the music. I think that's an important discipline to learn. So yes, if you want to be an intellectual, you should listen to some classical music. And we'll probably do a video about that, about why classical music is important. What will you not do if you're an intellectual? Well, what you certainly won't do is go around boasting about how clever you are and how great your knowledge is. Rather, what you will instead do is that you will listen to other people and seek to learn from others. And you will engage in constructive debates over contentious and controversial subjects, but you won't get into stupid arguments. You won't raise your voice or get into angry arguments. Have you heard of the phrase, casting pearls before swine from the Gospels? If you're an intellectual, you will not want to get into arguments with people who aren't serious, who are not really wanting to engage with the subjects, but just want to shout and mouth off and get angry and argue about stuff. An intellectual is never argumentative. What about politics? A lot of intellectuals will have strong opinions about politics. They will think deeply about society, about government and the relationship between government and the citizen. But there will be an objectivity to their politics, so they won't blindly follow political parties or particular charismatic political figures, but instead they will seek to be critical in their politics. So if you are a conservative intellectual, you will be critical of conservatives. You'll be able to see some of the flaws in right-wing thinking. Then if you are a socialist, you will be critical of socialists. You will see some of the flaws and the weaknesses in socialist ideology. How would an intellectual dress? Well, you probably won't dress like me in heavy metal shirts, and that's not terribly intellectual. I've heard it said that an intellectual never wears a t-shirt. An intellectual will wear a button-down shirt. I think intellectuals, they have their thoughts on higher things, so they're not carried away by fashion. They won't dress in lots of designer labels. I think the overall look is a kind of smart, casual, slightly worn, slightly comfortable look. Blazers will make you look very clever, very sort of studious. Tweed jackets will give you a professorial look. A lot of intellectuals like to wear sandals, so maybe you should get some sandals to wear. Um, that is how an intellectual sort of presents himself, and you'll probably wear spectacles rather than contact lenses. So I hope those suggestions are helpful. If you enjoyed this content, please do give it a like. Please consider subscribing to my channel and turning on notifications. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday and that you have a fantastic week. Goodbye.